Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 53. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who continues to like, share, comment on the show. Please, your ratings and your reviews are super helpful, but your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. Also want to thank our sponsors. Samson Equipment has been providing uncompromising quality for over 40 years. Samson products are long-lasting and made of the highest quality equipment on the market. Each project is built from the ground up with the ability to customize every need. The team at Samson focuses on developing the highest quality relationships with their customers, in addition to providing them unparalleled quality in every piece of equipment bearing the Samson name. Learn more about Samson's professional weight room solutions and the Samson standard at samsonequipment.com. And also our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out cerberusstrength.com and use our promo code strength_game to receive an extra 10% off your next order. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Coach Aaron Wood. Aaron is the director of strength conditioning at Belhaven University, where he oversees all 15 teams. Prior to arriving at Belhaven in 2019, Wood served as a strength coach at Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, Texas, for a season overseeing both the football and baseball programs. He spent time working with both ice hockey programs at the University of Minnesota, following 3 years in the private sector at Elkin Sports Performance in Richmond, Virginia, working with athletes of all levels from high school to professional. Aaron got to start coaching his alma mater, Liberty University, as an intern coach in 2014. Wood has competed in push-pull competitions and continued to stay deeply invested in his own training through powerlifting, triphasic, and conjugate styles, all to find the best approach to impact his student athletes that he works with. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Aaron Wood. What's going on, everybody? I'm excited today. I've got Coach Aaron Wood on the show. We were talking a little bit beforehand, and pretty small world in the coaching realm of all the people that kind of intertwined us. So awesome introduction. I'm excited to have you on today, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it.
Yeah, like we said, like you've been around coaching for a while. We've got some mutual friends, which is pretty cool, but like really want to dive in deep with you. Like what really got you started in the strength game, like sports you played growing up, kind of leading to your own current training cycle right now?
I was kind of blessed, man. I don't know how many people had a mom that was a bodybuilder, but I did. So she did shows kind of before she had me. I kind of wrecked her bodybuilding career for her. But yeah, she did a show like 2 years before she had me, worked out at a straight meathead bodybuilder, like steroids in the locker room type of gym. And so, you know, that was the first exposure to hearing about training, seeing any of it. You know, she had pictures from her show and stuff. You know, I was never really into it. I just heard about it from her. It was never something that I was super interested in. I was like the kid that played sports and was cool with going to practice and showing up for games. And that was pretty much the extent of what I was willing to commit to sports. So that was cool up until you get to be about 15, and then you get passed by everybody else who's way more talented and works harder. But I played 3 sports in high school, and then was honestly like kind of overweight. And really, I joke, I tell the guys that I coach now, I benched like 135 for like a few reps my senior year of high school as like a 260-pound offensive lineman. So I was not impressive at all. And I really only started lifting kind of once sports didn't really matter anymore. So as soon as I didn't have to lift anymore, that was when I got into lifting. So, yeah, I started kind of like training a little bit, really just to lose weight, and then got into it. And it's kind of been the only thing in my whole life that I've ever truly gotten obsessed with and stuck with for a really, really long period of time. It wasn't like a phase that I went through. So, yeah, 20 years later, here I am.
Yeah, that's a different kind of start to a career. And it's
for sure.
It's kind of funny. I think it's always the case with kids. Like you want to do kind of the opposite of what your parents are doing. And if they're really into it, even if they're not pushing you, or if they are pushing you for something, you're like, I'm going to go this way. It's like,
yep. Yeah.
Never.
I joke and I tell the guys, man, I used to go into my high school lifts and we would have like our workout card, and you were supposed to get the coaches to initial it after you were done. I would forge the coach's initials on my workout card so that I could hang out for 20 minutes, turn my sheet in, kind of sneak out the back door, and then go play Madden or something. And, it's one of those things. It kind of pays off now because I can sit there and say, like, look, if you want the definition of wasted potential, you're looking at it. So I can say firsthand experience, it's not going to pay off. And as soon as you realize that you've wasted all your potential and whatnot, it's probably too late to turn it around. So don't be Coach Wood, because Coach Wood made all the mistakes. So save them from some of those.
Yeah, that's a great thing. That's what I think a lot of coaches end up doing, that firsthand experience where you can kind of push players in a different direction, push your athletes somewhere else, and give them like some relatable stories where they can kind of utilize your own mistakes. So hopefully they don't just repeat the same ones. I think those ones have a lot more lasting impression on athletes. And it's definitely shifted your focus now, because now you're obviously a coach. You're training all the time, like doing some push-pull meets, and maybe one day getting the full powerlifting meet under your belt. But was there a definitive like shift in your mindset that really got you involved in coaching?
I think like a lot of people, when they pursue undergrad in exercise science, I think they maybe look at what's the most financially secure or promising avenue you can go down. And so I thought I'll be a physical therapist, and I'll work with tons of athletes, and I'll help them rehab, and I'll make so much money. And so I went to undergrad kind of with that idea in my mind. And I think it was kinesiology 101 or something like that. It was a class that we took where we kind of covered the different careers that existed within exercise science. And so the professor had been the head AT for basketball at Texas Tech. And he'd been several other places. I think he'd worked with like the Atlanta Hawks before too. He had some legit credentials, and he kind of said that was what he thought about doing when he first got into school too. And then he realized that like 98% of physical therapy is working with geriatrics. And he was like, okay, so you've got however many major sports leagues, they've got 30 teams each. So you've got 120 to 150 physical therapists in the entire country that are the physical therapists for a professional sports organization. So unless you're in the top 150, then that ain't going to be what you're going to do. And so he felt like the way to guarantee he was going to be around athletes was to pursue athletic training. And I think that was an eye opener for me, because I knew I wanted to do that. I knew I was interested in training, but I don't think I had really connected those dots when it came to, okay, I can pursue strength and conditioning. So I went more that way, and I was super blessed, man. I couldn't have planned it out, myself. It was dumb luck. I ended up at Liberty, and Bill Gillespie, who's in the Strength Coach Hall of Fame, was there. Dave Williams, who was in the Strength Coach Hall of Fame, was there. If you've ever seen the West Side versus the World documentary, when they start talking about using bands in training, Louis Simmons tells a story about him and Dave Williams going to this Dick Hartzell band presentation thing. So like the guy that went to the conference with Louis Simmons to learn about band training, that guy was at Liberty with me. So I got to intern with those two guys, and I don't know if there's any two better people that you could start under than them. So I kind of got to see what coaching and strength, how those two things go together from two guys that are unbelievable. And it just kind of went from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely taken you a lot of places to kind of after their tutelage and like actually learning kind of the ropes from them. Those are two great people to actually be able to be indoctrinated into the profession. And that's awesome to kind of see that like from that Kines like 101 class to actually go over the professions. I either don't remember or was not paying attention in that class for when we actually did all those things, because I didn't know like coaching and athletic training and physical therapy, like there are all these different branches off of the exercise science and kinesiology degree. I kind of the same as you, just got lucky and fell into it, walked in the weight room and realized that you could coach the varsity athletes. And it's one thing, like when people get into it, I don't think everybody understands exactly what they want to pursue, but also that they don't know that you could coach in the private sector, D3, D2, D1, like professional specific sports. Like there's all these different branches off of that degree or that profession. And I think most people just aren't there. They're not abreast of any of that stuff. And it's kind of an unfair advantage for some people that really know that they want to pursue it, which is awesome to kind of see that you got that opportunity. And I know from there, you went a lot of places, like you worked in the private sector for a little bit. You went under another big time strength conditioning coach at Minnesota, interning there as well. And it kind of landed you eventually now as a director of strength conditioning at Belhaven University. Kind of speak on some of those experiences you kind of learned along the way. What have you been able to take from some of those other places that now you can implement as a director?
Yeah, man, I'm super fortunate because, a lot of times you hear coaches and they'll say, they're talking about the different experiences that they've had and how you can kind of spin something that's negative into something positive. Like, if you work for a terrible coach, at least you're going to learn the things that you don't want to do, that kind of thing. I've never worked for a coach that wasn't great. And so, and I know that's not everybody's experience, and I'll tell everybody over and over and over again, I'm so blessed to have been around the coaches that I have been, because I know that's not everybody's experience. But I ended up, after I got fired from a personal training job, I ended up working at a private sports performance place for a guy named Jason Elkin in Richmond. And he had kids as young as 7 up to NFL guys. And so kind of got to work with a really broad spectrum of ages. He had adults that were there too. So got some Gen Pop stuff there too. I was in charge of a travel volleyball organization, their training. So it was like 14 teams between 14 and 18 years old. I'd never coached girls before, so that was like baptism by fire. I'd never had a sister. My mom was kind of like a tomboy, so that was my first time ever dealing with female athletes. And that was, like I said, threw me in the deep end there. But that was an awesome experience. So I was there for about 2.5 years and got to do a bunch of different stuff. And then, I wanted to get back into the college scene. The private thing is super cool, right? Like you dive in really deep on whatever one specific athlete needs, but you're kind of a hired gun, and so there's no team dynamic. There's no like us against the world type thing going on, which is the thing I missed about the team part of sports. And so, private sector is always looking for college coaches, but I don't think that the college realm is really looking for private guys a lot of the time. So I felt like I needed to do something to either build my resume or just get a foot in the door back into college sports. And so went up to Minneapolis and worked with Cal Dietz and his staff. And it's funny, man, I worked for 2 really good strength coaches. I felt like, man, I've got this strength and conditioning thing nailed down. I know how to get people strong and fast and all this other stuff. And I went into the weight room the first day in Minneapolis, and I was like, what in the world is going on right now? And it was a bunch of stuff that, there was no like, hey, interns, here's the intro to triphasic. We all had to take like a triphasic certification class, but that wasn't the same. so they hand you a workout card, and it's like the most complicated thing you've ever seen in your entire life. Like there's colors going all over the place, and there was no like, this is what this means, whatever. It was just, here's a card, figure it out. And so it took a little bit to kind of figure out what was going on, but it was bands attached to everything. It was partial range of motion on everything. It was no bilateral squatting. It was no Olympic lifting. It was everything that I had done. I was now hearing like, that's a waste of time. Don't do that anymore. And so I after like week one, I'm like, dude, I don't know anything about anything. And so that time up there was really neat, because I had to kind of throw everything that I thought that I knew out the window and just watch and learn what they were doing up there. And you can't argue with it. I mean, there's female hockey players that are squatting 400 plus pounds for 10-second eccentrics. Like, where are you going to find that? So I could sit here and say like, well, cleans are really good, but I don't know if cleans are going to get girls squatting 400 pounds on a single leg. So you can't argue with it, because obviously it works. And it really forced me to question a lot of the things that I really felt confident about, which ultimately, that's led to kind of where I'm at now, which is, I'm trying to think of what can I, rather than what other stuff can I pile onto the programs I'm already doing. It's more like, what have people been doing for 30 years that I can get rid of because it's not efficient or it's not as effective as it could be. It was really neat learning all the triphasic stuff and seeing a lot of the really advanced stuff that Cal does. But I think more than anything, it forced me to change my thought process when it came to everything that I was doing, and kind of question whether the things that people have always done were ever really that good in the first place. And in a lot of cases that it wasn't. So I think that what I have now and what I do with the athletes now is kind of a hybrid of what I learned under Bill and what I did with Jason, and then what Cal does. And it doesn't look the same all throughout the year. I don't have, like, if I was to say what kind of system guy I am, I don't know how I would answer that question. But I think that it allowed me to kind of say, what are the best parts of this and what are the best parts of that, and how do I figure out a way to marry those things in a way that works and makes sense. And so that's like the puzzle solving piece of the job that I think is really, really cool. So I'm just, trying to learn as much as I can. And I look back at the stuff that I wrote a year ago and I'm like, man, that was dumb. And then, a year before that was really dumb. I hope that a year from now, I'm looking at my programs now thinking, man, those were dumb. What I'm doing right now is so much better. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I've always said that if you look back on your program and you don't just like completely hate yourself, you're probably doing something weird. You haven't progressed at all. You haven't learned anything.
Sure.
But that's awesome. Yeah, because those are definitely two different systems and two different like thought processes, and still both three very successful coaches at two different programs. So it's awesome to be able to go in and really dive deep with both of them, pick their brain, like train in that and their style, and really be open to it. And I think that's what a lot of young coaches need to do. And I think you said it yourself, and I've definitely fallen victim to it. Once I learned from one coach, I interned with them and I was there for an extended period of time. I was like, this is the way to do it. Like there's proven success on the field. The athletes are bought in. Like I understand the system now. This is what I'm going to do. And then you go somewhere else that's completely different and you see similar success in a different method. And then it kind of stumps you at that point. And you're like, well, maybe other people are doing it well. And maybe I can find a way to blend these things together, which is awesome. Have you been able to take some of that stuff? Like, obviously you've taken some of it and implemented it with your athletes. Have you found ways to implement both those styles kind of into your training now?
Yeah. I think that I think powerlifting suffers from this maybe more than anything. People that kind of look at training systems in a vacuum, like here's the conjugate method, and here's the cube method, or 5-3-1 or whatever, and they look at them as completely unique things rather than a set of principles that guide training. And so you've got a kid who's training on, the conjugate method, and he's not making progress, and says, all right, well, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to do the cube method. It's like, all right, well, you're essentially doing like kind of sort of the same thing. It's just rearranged a little bit. You're probably going to get the same result. So one thing I've tried to do is kind of strip down things to what's the driving force behind whatever it is. Like what's the nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes part of triphasic that's driving the bulk of the adaptations, or same thing with conjugate that Bill used. So Coach Gillespie was a big Olympic weightlifting married with conjugate. Yeah. And so totally different than triphasic, but they're both the reasons that and the reasons that the both programs are successful might be different, but it's not because Bill's program in and of itself was completely unique and it doesn't share anything with triphasic. Like Cal's a big conjugate fan. And so there's things from the conjugate method that you'll see appear in triphasic, but if you're not looking for like the principles or the or whatever, and you're looking at them as completely unique things, you're probably not going to see like there's some carryover, or here's some things that I'm seeing consistently throughout these two what look like completely different programs, but these are the things that are driving the adaptation. So Bill was big on tempo stuff. All right, well, Cal's big on eccentrics and isometrics. Those are very similar. There's a lot of, if you look at Cal Dietz's power and speed blocks, there's a lot of accommodating resistance, light loads moved extremely explosively. All right, well, that's the dynamic effort method. So yeah, I've never run a conjugate triphasic hybrid block, but the things that make them both go are things I try to incorporate in my training or my athletes' training. The thing is that if you can't break it down into the concepts that make them go and you just try to slap them together, it's going to be overkill in one area. It's going to be underdone in another area. So I think that's the really neat part, and the kind of the problem solving part of the strength game is trying to figure out how to take two things that might look different on the surface. How do you take the best parts of both of them and have it actually make sense to where it's not too much of one thing and not enough of another?
Yeah, I like that. That's awesome. To find a way to marry the two. Because yeah, if you really just take conjugate method and you try to slap 5-3-1 into the main strength stuff, and you completely negate the rest of the volume and the repetition method stuff that comes with it, and you start to add like different triphasic components in there, like it's not just one piece that makes it triphasic. It's not just one piece that makes something like conjugate. And yeah, you can definitely overkill it in some ways, and you can definitely be missing a lot of important things if you don't understand the driving force behind each of those, and like understand the underlying principles for why you're putting something in a program. This is one thing that I like talk about with a lot with young coaches, is like, because you're starting to understand like how to work around like sport coaches and actually have conversations with them, because a lot of sport coaches grow up and play for someone that has a specific system or like a specific movement or exercise they want to see happen. Like, do you have any advice for any coaches like trying to explain to coaches the principles of what you're doing rather than trying to implement just a system to copy another coach?
Yeah, I think that's one of the toughest things, man. You get into the college realm, and I think your assumption is that as you graduate up through the levels, there's going to be a better understanding of physical development and training and whatever, because that's what you see in a lot of industries. Like you would assume that the CEO of Apple probably has a higher business acumen than somebody who's running a lemonade stand, but that's not always the case. And so sometimes like it's your ability to sell what you're doing and kind of, there's that push-pull relationship where you can't come at them super hard and try to tell them, you don't understand anything about what your athletes need, and I'm the source of all information and whatever. You kind of need to hold their hand and connect some dots for them about how things that they're doing on the field either overlap with what you do in the weight room, or how they complement each other, how they draw away from each other. And sometimes that's tough to do, because you have your initial conversation with them and you realize like we're in vastly different places in terms of understanding, and it's hard to even have that initial conversation because you realize like, man, I'm way, way far apart in terms of understanding. But it is super, super important, because I think that at the end of the day, it starts at the top. The athletes that you're working with came to the school to play for the head sport coach. They didn't come to lift weights under you. And so that coach's endorsement of what you're doing can make or break your program. So they've got to be on board. Otherwise you're kind of doomed. So I think it's very similar to coaching on the floor and being able to explain the squat in 8 different ways, cue it 8 different ways, because it's not going to work the same for everybody. Being able to have your high level explanation of what you're doing, and then your kind of dumbed down explanation of what you're doing, so that the coaches can be on the same page and they can understand that, hey, sprinting is another form of plyometric. And if we're doing that here, then we don't need to do it here. If you're doing excessive volume here, then it takes away from other stuff elsewhere in your program for the week. And being able to connect some of those dots for them in like a non-threatening way, where you're not coming across condescending, I think is huge. But I would say that for the vast majority of coaches, you're going to be underwhelmed at their understanding of a lot of these concepts that you kind of take for granted. And you're going to be walking away from the conversation like, I can't believe I just had to explain that, but that's real. And I think that has as much to do with your success as a coach as whether you can write a really, really solid, complicated program that's going to squeeze every ounce of juice out of an athlete. If you can't sell it to the sport coach, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, I love what you said, talking about like the different levels. Obviously, there people start to think that there's a hierarchy to it, like Division III, Division II, Division I, FCS, FBS. Like it's not the case. That it's just a systematic approach where you keep going up, and the level, like the talent level goes up, and the work ethic goes up, and the competency level goes up. That's not the case. I mean, I've worked at Division III level just as you, and you've done the same thing at the FBS level and the FCS level for Division I. And there's a lot of commonality, more so across the board. Maybe some of the rules are different, or some of the genetics and like some of the athletes that you're getting to work with are a little bit different, like just the sheer size of like FBS football players versus like Division III football players. Like you could put them together and you can kind of tell the difference, but the intangibles that you're going to get, like the work ethic with some of those kids, like it's all the same. You're just working a little bit different, like with that. So kind of coming back, like now that you work with the Division III side, like what are some of the challenges kind of presented, like from a smaller school side, that you might not see or people might not be aware of from the Division I? Because like we said, there's a lot of things that are more in common than there are that are not.
Yeah, there's really people are the same, man. Everywhere you go. I think in a lot of ways, the Division I level, the competency might be the same, but the egos are just bigger. And that might be the biggest differentiating factor. But I would say challenges at the D3 level. I think you're going to have kids that are motivated and not motivated at every level, right? The D3 level is challenging because it's non-scholarship. And that's a big piece. The kids that you recruit and their ability to stay in school, whether it's academic or it's financial, that's a huge factor. You don't want to have roster turnover that's 50% every year. But if coaches don't recruit the types of kids that can stay at their school, then you miss out on so much of that development. You're not able to have 4 years with a kid. There's no redshirt year at Division III. So you don't have a 5-year window to develop somebody. So those things are challenging. I think from a scheduling perspective, the D3 model is truly student first and athlete second. So the university is not devoting as many of their resources to kind of streamlining things for the athlete to make their athletics life as easy as possible. So they're not going to rearrange the academic schedule to suit the needs of the athletes. So the athletes are going to class just like a normal kid. They've got all the same things that they have to do that the normal students do. They just have this monster time commitment on the sports side on top of that. And it makes it tough, man. On the weight room side, it makes the schedule tough. There's not, it makes it difficult when you have, our weight room is 3,000 square feet. We've got 10 racks, which is not terrible for a D3 situation at all. But if you've got, if you're looking at your schedule, there's really only 2 hours in the morning that teams are going to train. There's really only like 3 hours in the afternoon that teams are going to train. So you're trying to jam 15 teams into the weight room. There's always going to be hurt feelings with different coaches feeling like they're getting bumped for a team that's got a bigger roster or whatever. There's just a lot more of the kind of the logistics that are difficult to negotiate. And so you layer that on top of some of the other stuff that goes with just being a D3 school that's high academic and non-scholarship. And it's a challenge for sure. But it kind of, I remember you worked with Ron McKeefery, and I know that one of his big sayings was make wherever you are the big time. And I think he's somebody that really believes that working at a smaller college like that makes you a much, much better coach, because you do have to be creative and you have to problem solve a lot of things that, if I'm a single sports strength coach with a 20,000 square foot weight room, I don't have a lot of logistical issues, so it makes you better in terms of all of the outside, off the floor, not sets and reps stuff, which is funny because that's the stuff that you don't learn in strength coach school. You just gotta figure that part out. But it probably has as much to do with whether you're successful or not as anything else that you do.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's definitely a trial by fire, and no two places are the same. This is my 7th school now, like being at Jacksonville, and like a lot of the stuff that I've been able to do, the coaches I've worked for, kind of the weight rooms, the environment, the logistics, all that stuff has helped prepare me for it. But there's no way you can just copy and paste what I was doing somewhere else and try to implement it here. It's different teams, different culture, different environment, different resources. I mean, that's probably one of the big things that, like, between the different divisions is what really comes down to staffing, resources, and availability for time. Because, I mean, we talked about it a little bit beforehand, and you and myself are in similar boats. We don't have football, but like we have a bunch of other sports at Division I level. You have football at the Division III level, and we have very similar staffs, like sizing. So that's a lot of people working in a small setting with very finite hours to be able to get stuff done. But have you been able to, like, in your time since you've been there, been able to find any like creative solutions, like with your staff or with like the logistics of the weight room or fundraising or anything along those lines that have really kind of spin it in a positive direction for you and the rest of the department?
There's been several things we've had to do to be creative. During COVID, I'm fortunate our football field is right outside of our weight room, so we were able to do field stuff. You do field stuff with one group, weight room with another group. That was especially important when we had limits on how many kids you could have in the weight room. So having the ability to do field sessions, weight sessions separately, but kind of in the same area, it has been great. I think that you learn about the teams that you have, and then the more you know about the teams, the easier it is to negotiate some of this stuff. The softball team that I have, they're of dogs, man. They'll bury. I'd put them up against anybody in the world. They'll bury people in terms of work ethic and just getting after it. They're kind of a team that prides themselves on working hard, and so an early morning lift for them is not a big deal. But there's other teams where you drag them in there early in the morning, and your output is going to be essentially zero. So you figure out who are the teams that kind of have that nose to the grindstone type mentality. And okay, I'm going to sell them on why they should lift at 6 a.m. And that's going to help me on the back end with freeing up a spot later in the day for another team that I know isn't going to be a 6 a.m. team. Or a baseball team is like that. They would lift at 5:45 in the morning, and it was kind of a badge of honor thing for them that they were the team that was going to get up the earliest and train the earliest and whatever. It was great because you got great effort from them because they were into it and they really wanted it. And on the back end, it makes your life easier because I can put the basketball team later in the day and they're not going to be dragging. So I think that's where the relationship piece of it, kind of learning about the kids and their personalities and what makes them tick and what buttons you can push. It ultimately, it means so much more than whether I can write a really good squat program. And it's funny because when I was younger, if I was listening to a podcast or if I was going to a clinic and I was looking at who's talking about what and what do I want to hear, if it was some kind of like Brett Bartholomew art of coaching type thing, I was like, screw that, dude. I don't care about that. It's like, I want to know whether 75% or 80% is optimal for squat strength. Like that was the end all be all, right? Because if I can write the best program, I'm the best strength coach. And now I'm like, it doesn't matter. Is the kid training hard or not? Because those details, 75 or 80%, like on some level it matters, but all of the other stuff about how to connect with the kids, how to connect with the coaches, learning about them, the interpersonal pieces of coaching, that's the stuff that's going to make you successful or not. And that's the stuff that comes with time. I'm so much better at figuring all that stuff out now because I know so much more about the kids and the program and the coaches. Day one, I never would have been able to piece some of this stuff together that I can now. So I would say to anybody that's younger, everybody wants to write the best program when they're starting out. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is 100% the other stuff that's going to make or break you as a coach. I think everybody is, we should all assume that everybody can write a pretty effective program. But can you work with people? Can you problem solve? Can you get people to want to work for you? That's the stuff that's so much more important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I remember overthinking percentages and numbers and rep schemes and making sure everything fell within Prilipin's chart. I would sit up forever and just wasting time for a team to be 15 minutes late and me have to scratch everything, or the whole team coming at once, or them having to condition right after practice. It's like, you guys realize how long I've been thinking about this program? Come on. That stuff. Yeah. You start to realize real quick that if you don't know your team, you don't know your athletes, you don't know the weight room situation, the setup, what the sport coaches think you do, what they think that you don't do, all those sort of things, that plays such a huge role in what you're doing. And honestly, I tell interns all the time, I was like, I could pull someone off the street right now and they can put together a program for me. It might make someone die, throw up, like not do anything for them, but anybody in the world can write a program that looks like an exercise. Like, can you actually do it day in, day out? Can you periodize it? And can you understand your athletes and how they respond to it? Because that's way more important. And it just takes time, like, and it really takes you developing those relationships.
I had my GA. I've got two GAs. One of them super into programming, and every once in a while he'll ask me a question about, so he'll give me like a hypothetical. And so there was one day he asked me, how do I periodize or progress my arm training? And I was like, it kind of made me laugh because I'm like, look, man, I get up there, I write the lift. And then when we get to the arm section, it's like 3 or 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps. And I just kind of pick whatever exercise I think they're going to get into that day, because that's like, it's the arm section, but it's really the buy-in section. It's the get the football players to come in, get a pump, feel good so that they want to come back and squat the next day, And if I've got a 300-pound tackle who deadlifts 800 and benches 455, and if he curls 25-pound dumbbells until he graduates, I don't care. If he never bumps it up to 30s, whatever. We're not going to win and lose games on that. But if he comes in and loves curling 25-pound dumbbells, and that's going to get him to push on the other stuff, then that's worth its weight in gold. So yeah, it's like I can't tell you the last time that I wrote out like a 8-week progression on hammer curls or on tricep pushdowns. It's come in and train hard. And that's one of the crazy things about working with Cal. And especially, I went up there about a week and a half ago, and we're sitting there talking about training. And this is a guy who, probably relatively speaking, has one of the most complex systems on the planet. And if you've never been up there and seen it in person, it's more complicated than you think it is reading triphasic. It's like infinitely more complicated. Like they don't even break down the weight room at the end of the day because it would take so much time to set everything back up the next day. And so we're sitting there talking about stuff and just kind of shooting the breeze and whatever. And at the end of the day, what it all comes back to is whether the kids are training hard or not. Like, yeah, all of the stuff that he's developed and thought of is unbelievable for sure. But it doesn't matter if the kids aren't training hard. And when we talk about where programs and methods fall short, it's in the effort side of things. It's not in the complexity side of things. It's at the end of the day, are they doing enough to get something out of it? Are they freaking training hard or not? And that being what really matters, not, did I choose 12 or 15 reps on my hammer curls, So it's like, it's super complicated, and then it's also stupid simple.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a young kid. That's a young coach's mentality, trying to make everything perfect and real. And it takes a while, and it took me a while, I remember, to like be able to step back from my program and not overcoach some things too, and realize that the kids would be able to do it with or without me too. If I wrote it on the program and I went in my office, it's probably a different dynamic than me like up their ass, like blowing the whistle and coaching everything hard. But there are some points in time where you don't need to be on top of them all the time. Let them breathe, let them like dictate how the session is going. And then you can kind of come in and like control the temperature a little bit more if it needs to be done, which, I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. We're not on the field for any of those things. We're not on the court. We're not on the ice. We're not a part of it once the game clock starts. So being able to take a step back is huge.
I think that one of the things I found that's super valuable is training female athletes, where their comfort zone, just speaking generally, their comfort zone and their happy place is not the weight room. And that's unfortunate. And I think it has a lot to do with how people perceive training female athletes at the youth level and what's needed, what's good, what's bad. So in a lot of situations, they don't come in with a high training age. And so it's an environment that is by nature a little bit uncomfortable. And so you start to put them through things. And if you're overzealous with your coaching, in your mind, you're thinking, I'm helping her out. She's going to get so good at this goblet squat, back squat, deadlift, whatever. If you're coaching something every single set with an athlete, I guarantee you that the in the big picture, all you're doing is creating a ton of insecurity. And all she's hearing is, I screwed this up, I screwed this up, I screwed this up, I screwed this up. And there's some times where you just flat out just need to stop talking and don't coach anything. They'll self-organize a little bit. They'll feel when things don't feel right. I know I messed something up, but with younger athletes, with athletes with a low training age, with female athletes that you know are not in the most comfortable situation in the world, you need to pick one thing that day to coach and make sure you do a really good job coaching it. And then the other 90% of the time, you need to be encouraging and make it a place that they want to come back to, where they feel like, hey, I got better at something. And that's one of the things, when this is my first year with the softball team, and that's one of the dynamics that I didn't realize was broken before. But I came in this year and I'm just doing what I would do anyway. But I realized after a little while, it was not what they were used to. They weren't used to somebody walking around, coaching them up on the important things, but otherwise being a cheerleader, and how much of a difference that makes. But you'll see that with younger athletes too. Sometimes they don't need to hear every single thing that they've done wrong, because all they're hearing is, wow, I'm really bad at the squat. I don't ever want to do it again. So sometimes it's what you don't say that's way more important than what you do say.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great point. Obviously, I mean, female and male athletes aside, like if we're trying to coach to the top level. A lot of times we end up trying to coach to the top level and hope that the middle group, like the average, like the bell curve, like starts to be conform to the higher group. But then a lot of times we lose the lower ones, the ones with lower training age, like, and the ones that don't really necessarily want to be in the weight room at all. They feel forced to be in there. And if you're overzealous and you coach things hard and you're giving feedback and you think that it's helpful, like a lot of times you're right, it's probably scaring them away. And now their confidence is even more shot than it was before, especially when you look to your side and someone else is squatting 5 times more than you, or can actually execute the movement. Because nothing's more frustrating to an athlete that is really good at their sport, that comes into the weight room and you try to show them how to do a movement and they can't make their body do it. And all you do is like try to give them feedback and something doesn't work. But then that day when it clicks and they can actually execute it, man, like you got them forever at that point.
Yeah, I think, and that's why the Cal experience was so big for me. It was just, there were no absolutes, right? It's about a stimulus. It's about progressive overload. It's not about the whatever, squat, bench, blah, blah. And so I went from kind of thinking, like we said, thinking this is the way to do everything. Cleans are the way to do everything. Back squats the way to do everything. And got away from that. And now, all right, if I've got an athlete who's got a really bad back squat, that's fine. We can, if I really need to fix it, we can fix it. But if their leverages are poor, if it's a really tall athlete, whatever it is, at the end of the day, the back squat is a tool to develop lower body strength and power. And so if I can substitute something that's going to do the exact same thing and be more easily executed, and I can get a benefit that day as opposed to spending that whole day coaching technique and never overload the athlete, then to me, that's a win. And so and down here, one of the interesting things, kind of the challenges about being in Mississippi, especially at the D3 level, is when you look at the spectrum of athletes that we get. So on the football team at Belhaven specifically, we've got a first team all conference tackle whose high school is in a town of 134 people. We also have 3 kids on the roster who are from Hoover High School, which is one of the top 10 high school football programs in the country, and probably has facilities that are nicer than a lot of FBS schools. And so you're going to have, and that first team all conference player tackle from the 134 person town is in the same class as a first team all conference tight end from Hoover. So they came in together. And so I'm tasked with getting something out of both guys on day one. I don't have the ability to separate them out into a developmental group or into an advanced group because I don't have the staff or the space to do it. So I've got to figure out a way to train them so that I can overcome whatever weight room skill level deficiencies one might have or advantages another one might have, so that they can both train and get better. And that was a big reason I got away from Olympic weightlifting. And that was a big reason that Cal's system was so huge, because it took all of the skill component pieces out of it and said, okay, what's the stimulus I'm after? And then I'm going to try to pick the lowest skill stimulus that I can that's going to give me an equal to or better than result. And so now we do tons of sprinting, we do tons of loaded jumping. And those are things that on day one, that guy from the 134 person town, he's sprinted, he's jumped. So his skill level is automatically going to be much, much closer to everybody else's or better. And I don't have to deal with whether he's ever cleaned in his entire life. And I think at Belhaven for a long time, we were playing a lot of younger kids. So when they showed up in August, they needed to be ready to play in September. So I didn't have 6 months to work with a dowel and do a bunch of Olympic weightlifting progressions. Like, we needed to get bigger, faster, stronger from the jump. And so by being able to look at things from a different perspective and find substitutes for things in the same way that I would for a 7 foot tall basketball player, I'm not necessarily going to back squat that guy, but we could do a trap bar deadlift and we can adjust the height to fit whatever that guy needs. It's the same principle. But it allows you to, it doesn't look as pretty as when every single person in the whole room is executing a really effortless, super good technique power clean, but everybody's getting better in whatever way they need to get better. And so once you get away from the dogma of strength and conditioning, where you have to join a camp and you have to have this strength and conditioning religion that you would die for, and you're fighting all the other strength coaches that have their differing religion that they're willing to die for, you can do a lot better job by the kids. I'm convinced that there are coaches, there's hardcore Olympic guys and then hardcore non-Olympic guys where they would rather you slap their kid in the face than tell them that a power clean isn't the best exercise. They're more loyal to that than they are to anything else in their life, or vice versa. But at the end of the day, that's them making it about them and their methodology, their views, than what's best for the athlete. And I think one of the cool things about being in strength and conditioning is, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, are you helping the athlete get better? That should be all that matters to you. And you don't have to worry about who's playing, who's good, who's bad, whatever. You're just about development and playing time and all those things, who's all conference, those things ultimately shouldn't matter. It's just, let me make the best decision for how to train the kid.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's the end of the game, the bottom line. That's what it should always be revolving around. And I mean, whatever gets the job done, that's what it should be. I mean, if you're training for powerlifting, obviously be a powerlifting coach. If you're training for weightlifting, be a weightlifting coach, all for it. But strength conditioning at this level is all a tool to get you to perform in your sport of choice. So if you're doing your athletes justice and you're doing everything you possibly can do to make them better and keep them safe and help them progress, then you should be utilizing every single tool that you have access to easily. And picking lower barrier entries is, like, rather than high skill level things, is definitely something you have to do. Like when your hands are tied with staffing, or the weight room is a smaller setting than you can't split up the program, all those sort of things. So that's where you have to really get creative. And that's awesome to hear you do that. Kind of speaking on your own training, obviously, like, it's a small weight room. You got a smaller staff than a lot of places that people have been, like, anywhere else. Keeping your own training dialed in, like, obviously there's athletes that probably see you get after it as well, practicing what you preach and kind of getting under the bar as well. Like, how do you think that impacts athletes when they see you getting involved in training? And, like, does it do anything else, like, besides just develop buy-in as a coach who's actually training himself?
I think the buy-in piece is part of it for sure. I think probably for me, like I look the way that I look, right? So like that probably is a selling point for football players, but probably not very many other people. I can guarantee you the softball team does not care how much I bench press. But the football players do. I think that what training, if you want to call it walking the walk or living the life, whatever, I think what it's done for me more than anything else is, I'm able to experiment on stuff on myself, because at the end of the day, I don't really care what happens to me, right? If I told an athlete to do something and they got hurt, or I told them to do something and it didn't work out, that would gut me, because I'd done wrong by them. If I tear my pec because I did something dumb, I'm kind of like indifferent about it, probably annoyed, but whatever. So it allows me to experiment with stuff that might be, maybe it's diet stuff, or maybe it's training stuff. And I think that drives a lot of the ideas that I use for the programs. So I'm kind of my own test dummy in a lot of ways. And I think that having some personal experience with different stuff, and on the diet side, maybe more than anything, allows me to kind of talk to the athletes that have questions about stuff, or they're struggling with stuff in a more real way. I think a lot of people assume I was always a fitness person. I was always in shape or lifting or whatever. And I wasn't, man. I was, there's been times where I was 27, 28% body fat, like definitely not in shape by any measure. And so I understand the emotions that go with that, the difficulties that go with that. And so if I've got an athlete that I'm trying to counsel on stuff like that, it's not just me speaking about something in the abstract, or me spitting out, ACSM recommendations for whatever. It's, yeah, I felt exactly the way that you're feeling, and here's what I experienced that was helpful. And so there's kind of that big picture piece to it, but there's also a very practical piece. Like I've got athletes that don't have big appetites. And when I was 280 pounds and I was trying to eat 300 plus grams of protein, and I don't have a huge appetite, I had to figure out ways to sneak protein into meals. So it was practical stuff. Like I take half a cup of cottage cheese and I melt it down, and then I put my eggs in it when I scramble them. And that's an extra 15 grams of protein that I don't have to go eat in chicken breast or whatever. So I think that doing that on a daily basis for 10 or 15 years, and picking up tricks or learning what not to do, learning, hey, if you try to do the low carb thing and then you finish it and you just go back to eating normally, here's the rebound effect and how terrible it is. Please don't do this. There's all of those things that I've experienced and learned the hard way that I can save them from having to do. Whereas if I was, and there, man, there's so many guys that are, they're into the data side. They're more sports science guys, and they're not huge lifters. And I've got all the respect in the world for those guys, because I don't want anything to do with their job. But I think that sometimes when you're so hardcore on the academic side and you're a little light on the practical side, you do lose a little bit of that ability to offer practical, pragmatic advice. And so I think that I've had a bench press that's been stuck at like 460 for like 3 years. So I'm probably not the guy to talk to about what's the biggest plateau buster for the bench press, but I can probably tell you a whole lot of ways to not make your bench press go up, and tell you, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And so I think that sometimes those things are just as valuable as being able to tell them what to do. Is here's the laundry list of mistakes that I've made. Please don't go do this. This is the better way to do it. And so that to me, that's more valuable.
Yeah, that's great advice. Sometimes, what not to do is also just as important as what to do. And I think athletes, especially younger athletes, like college age ones, rather than give them like percentage values for nutrition or like an easy answer, like I think you hook them a lot more when you can give them firsthand experience, a story of what you were able to either overcome, or even if you don't know the information, say you'll get back to them, or that's something like you're interested in, like you can report back to them when you find some more info. But I mean, testing yourself out with all these different programs and kind of going through and being your own guinea pig, like those are huge, because at the end of the day, if you're servicing your athletes the right way, you're doing a service to them by testing it out on yourself before you turn them into a lab rat, for sure. That's awesome. Hey, so I know one of the things you talked about, like kind of getting out of the private sector, was that us versus the world mentality. I know that's a big thing, especially at a smaller school where maybe like you don't have the same market as some of like the top programs. I mean, same where I'm at Jacksonville. Like that's not a big market, even like in the town, even though it's named after the same town. But you can really develop that culture and that mentality by having all the teams train in the same place, train at the same time, compete against each other. Have you found any tricks or tips or anything that's been successful, like creating a really competitive team environment at Belhaven, like almost to like build a sense of unity, school pride, like 15 sports, one team kind of mentality, us versus the world?
Yeah, so I wore this shirt for a reason. So this is our Belhaven football shirt for the year. It's got the word chip on the shoulder. I think Belhaven as a whole has adopted this kind of underdog mentality. Going back, I want to say it was 10 or 15 years. I want to say maybe it was in the last 10 years. If you remove the spring and then you remove our fall, we had lost more games than 91% of college football teams. We were in the bottom 9% in the whole country in terms of wins. And they weren't close losses. It was like getting the break speed off of you by 70 or 80 points. And so nobody expects anything out of you. A lot of the kids that we have on our team, nobody else wanted. And that's okay. We recruited high character kids. We recruited kids that were good in the classroom. We recruited kids that were going to work really hard. And once they tasted a little bit of success, they were able to build on it. But we always kind of kept this nobody thinks you're worth anything type of attitude. And the kids have really bought into that. And they've, we had a great year this year. We were 7-3. And I think they still think nobody thinks they're any good. And so, and I think a lot of the teams kind of have that same mentality. That works at Belhaven because of the circumstances that are unique to the school and kind of how the school is viewed athletically. But I think that there's anybody you got to find, like we said before, you got to know the teams and you got to know kind of the landscape of the athletic department. There's always going to be something like that that exists. And it just so happens that the underdog thing is what played really well at Belhaven. What's neat is that once the teams start to see other teams succeed, they really, and I think strength and conditioning has had a lot to do with that. And I started out with football, and the kids started to see some of the things that the guys were doing on the football team and how they were, the way that we were training was very different. And they wanted to know what this was all about. And they saw guys put on 15 or 20 pounds in an off season, and it catches their eye like, well, that guy didn't used to look like that. And so they want to know what that's all about. They want to experience that too. And so it was kind of like team by team by team. You started to see more and more interest in what we were doing, and pushing the competitive, pushing that like, let's get away from getting the break speed off of us type of losers mentality that was just pervasive here for so long. And once that happened, it was just, like I said, it was like a domino effect. And so you're starting to see, it wasn't just one team that turned around. It's been several, but they haven't forgotten that nobody cared who they were 2 years ago. And so, those guys could probably win a national title next year, and they'd still think that everybody thought they sucked. And so that's going to continue to be what drives them. And I think that's one of the cool things about coaching is you look for those things, those buttons to push, and it's going to be different with each team. Our softball team, for instance, they were ranked as high as 6th in the country last year. And they kind of faded towards the end of the year and lost 2 in a row in the conference tournament and got knocked out. That's been a big thing is the kind of, there's unfinished business next year. And so I think knowing the personalities of your team and knowing who's going to respond to what type of message is huge. And like I said, it all goes back to the personal investment in the kids and learning who they are and what makes them tick. That makes your life so much harder, because that can dictate what you do training wise. You know, I knew that I had those softball girls were hyper motivated. And once they were bought in, I knew that I could literally do anything I wanted to do. And it didn't matter how hard it was. It didn't matter how brutal it was. So I said, hey, we're going to go full blown supermax, eccentric, triphasic. Let's get after it. And we had girls doing split squats with 300 and 400 pounds. And they took pride in it, because it was like, damn it, if we're going to lose in the conference tournament again. So I think, like I said, it's been different with different teams, but at least with us, the whole underdog mentality thing has been really, really good for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing to see like strength coaches like actually getting invested in a program, understanding the athletes, understand like what the dynamic and what really makes them tick. Like you can't fabricate that message or your motto or anything like that. And you can't copy some other successful team or unsuccessful team, whatever their culture. Like you have to find a way to develop it yourself and instill it and completely like mold it, mature it, make sure that everything is still building on it. It's a living organism essentially. And strength coaches have a really good pulse for a team and that culture and being able to drive it forward.
Yep. I think that, and it's got to be authentic. And I think that one of the things that I think sometimes the sport coaches, sometimes administration, they don't give the kids credit for being as perceptive as they are and being able to sense whether something's real or if it's faked. And it's like, you can't ask them to blindly follow something that's not real if you also wouldn't do that same thing. You know, you're asking them to just mentally check out and do something because you're saying to do it. You don't believe in it. And if your leadership was doing the exact same thing, you would be asking questions and not wanting to do it either. But for some reason, we're expecting 18 to 22-year-olds to just shut that part of their brain off and follow something that's not real. So yeah, it does 100% has to be something that's authentic and unique to the team. And that's one of the coolest things about being able to coach multiple sports, is that I don't have to be the same guy all the time with every single team, because the team's different. And so if you watch me in a football lift, or you watch me in a softball lift, or if you watch me in a baseball lift, it's different because the teams are different. And so, and the music choice is going to be different, or what I'm doing during the lift is going to be different, because everybody needs something different. So in the same way that you're going to individualize training for all the physiological reasons that you would individualize it, you've got to do the same thing from the vibe of the room, how you interact with the kids, the message that you're sending. It's all got to be unique to those kids. Otherwise you just come across as a robot, and I think you lose a lot of credibility. And then you're going to be complaining about effort and wondering why in the world nobody wants to come in and train hard. Well, it's because you're a fake, or you're a robot, and that's not what sells to kids, not in 2021 anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I stump people sometimes when I say this, and I have to defend myself a lot of times, but I tell them like, I don't coach effort. I think everything from the program, from how I deliver the message, from how the room is set up, from the thought that's put into the programs, from how I interact with the coaches, the players there, I think that drives the effort. And I think that gives some credibility. And I think you're 100% true. Like that authenticity, like it really is driven forward with your actions and how that room is carried out, the culture that's in that room. And honestly, like walking the walk and being the right type of person and being true to your colors when you come in, I think that really it plays dividends like completely. That's awesome, man. Hey, so like any good training session, we end the show with a good finisher. So I've got 4 quarters for you,
Okay.
4 questions, and maybe overtime at the end. So you can go rapid fire, or you could take your time on each one. But you ready?
Yeah, fire away.
All right. First one, biggest influence in strength and conditioning and biggest influence in powerlifting.
Coach Gillespie's biggest influence in strength and conditioning for sure. I would say that he's probably influenced me more than anybody else outside of my dad. I probably learned as much from him about how to work with people, how to be a man, a lot of intangible stuff that I don't think I couldn't put a price tag on it. And sometimes it's difficult to verbalize. There's a lot of fake people in strength and conditioning. And he's one that I don't think I ever saw him say one thing and do another in the entire time I've known him. So he's I'm very thankful to call him. It's hard to call him a friend because he'll always be Coach Gillespie. He would say I'm his friend, but he's a mentor to me for sure. In powerlifting, it might be him too, man. It's guy benched 1,000 something pounds at 63. It's pretty good influence. So, but like I think if you were to just say, hey, write yourself a training program, I probably would gravitate more towards West Side if I'm just kind of picking what I enjoy doing. So Louis Simmons has been a big one. I was a big Brandon Lilly guy back in the day. So I would say Bill, Louis, and Brandon Lilly.
Nice. Hey, so what can you be found doing when you're not in the weight room? What are some of your hobbies outside of coaching and training?
Man, travel a little bit when I can. I'm a decent cook. I watch a lot of 90 Day Fiance, and then I'm a big fan of all the spinoffs. So between that and trash TV on MTV, I stay pretty busy I don't watch a lot of Netflix because there's always a new 90 Day Fiance series coming out.
Guilty pleasure videos.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, so if you weren't coaching, what profession do you think you would be doing? And if you weren't going to do push-pull meets or powerlifting, what sport do you think you would pick?
I used to work in investments before I started coaching. That was my dad's an investment advisor, and I worked for him for 5 or 6 years. That was kind of interesting. Like the whole stock picking thing is a little bit similar to, with strength and conditioning, you're trying to write the program that's going to make the difference. With stock picking, it's like you're trying to find the needle in the haystack stock where you can beat the market, that kind of thing. So there's some similarities there with athletics, kind of the competitive side. I couldn't work in an office every day. I don't know if I would go back to that. But that's something that I was decent at. So I'll go with that. I really couldn't picture myself doing anything else. And what was the second part?
If it wasn't powerlifting, what sport would you want to compete in?
You know what? I hated soccer for forever. Just thought it was the softest sport ever. And then when I got out of high school, I started watching Manchester United all the time. That was about the time that David Beckham came over here and played in MLS. And I remember watching him, and I was just amazed that guy could place a ball with his foot better than I could do it with my arms. And I just thought it was so neat to me because it was something that was so far away from my skill set. So I think I would want to be a professional soccer player.
All right. You'd be probably one of the biggest ones out there for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, so setting up an ideal training day for yourself, what is your training music or go-to PR song? And what is your favorite post-training meal look like?
So max effort bench press is going to be the lift of the day for sure. I'm pretty old school, like powerlifting playlist. Elite FTS has a pretty good Spotify playlist that I'll play often. But I'll say Metallica is probably the go-to song, or just any of theirs, PR song. I'm a big sushi guy, so I'll go all you can eat sushi. And there's always room for ice cream, so I'll go ice cream for post workout.
That's a good combo. Hey, so last one I got for you for overtime. What is for you your favorite part of coaching or your favorite part of training?
Favorite part of coaching is watching kids do things that are hard and seeing how much it sucks in the moment, then seeing them accomplish things that they never thought they could accomplish later, and make the connection between going through the stuff that sucked and how it paid off in the end. Because that's if you talk about making an indelible impression on a kid's life, I don't know if it gets more real than that, because that's literally life stuff for forever. And it's got application to literally everything they'll do, whether it's work or relationships, family. So I think that being able to be a part of that personal growth that they experience, it's probably difficult to come up with something that's a whole lot better than that. The training, man, I'm 35 and things are starting to slow down. So I think not becoming a fat turd is probably the best part of training for me. Kicking the fat turd can down the road as far as I can, for as long as I can. So that's probably it for me.
I like it. Yeah, delay it as long as possible, for sure.
That's right.
Awesome, man. Hey, well, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. For anybody that's got follow-up questions for you, like want to pick your brain on coaching or anything along those lines, where can they follow you?
So I post a lot of, as much as I can. D3 has some weird rules as far as social media stuff goes, when you can post stuff and what you're allowed to post. But I'm on Twitter and Instagram. The handle's Aaron Wood with no space, _SC. So I'm pretty active on both of those. And usually in the summer, in the spring and then in the fall, post some pretty cool stuff what the guys are doing. I've got some guys that have done some neat stuff. So I try to put them out there as much as we can within the rules. But a lot of the kind of the ideas and stuff that I'll use, put it out there. We did a pretty cool conditioning test in the before the fall, put all that stuff out there. That was pretty well received. So yeah, I try to stay relevant out there. I didn't realize Twitter was as much of a recruiting tool as it is, but so I try to stay active on those.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've seen some of the guys' lifts and I saw the conditioning tests, and that I really like what you were thinking with that stuff. I know there was a little iteration off the tribe test in it. Mm-hmm. And that's a way better approach than running gassers and 300. So
yeah, the 300-pound guys would agree with you.
Well, anything to help them actually play their position the right way, rather than get them ready for something dumb. So, Hey, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. So thanks again for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.